I think the correlation between being in athletics and being in business or corporate America, you have to have the right values, the right mission that fits for yourself, and you have to have the right goals that all align. So if you're talking about sports and business, that is one thing that will be 100% in common, regardless if you're a pro athlete or if you're someone like Ryne at the top level, top executive level at a prestige organization.
Yeah, well, I think JD actually said it really well. I think that that's what the common tie is that willingness to put in that extra work. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we see with lots of athletes. Top athletes are they're willing to put in that extra time. They're willing to put in that extra work, and I think you see that with high performing people in the workplace. Now, I can step back there and put a little bit of a downside on that too. I mean, a lot of top performing athletes, a lot of top performing executives do not have exactly the best family lives. In many cases, we learn that, that in fact, they're often putting their home life second.
From Goose Creek Consulting, welcome to the Silver Linings Handbook, a podcast on psychology in the workplace. I'm Jason Blair. That was Jihad Abdur-Rahman, a former defensive lineman at Delaware State University who was drafted into the National Football League and who's now a client solutions consultant for Goose Creek Consulting. That was also Dr. Sherman, a world-renowned psychologist and chief science officer at Hogan Assessment Systems, where he's responsible for Hogan's groundbreaking data science and research into well-validated personality assessments for the workplace. Since leaving the NFL, JD, which is what I call him, has worked in staffing, sales, business development, and run his own business. Before coming to Goose Creek, JD was a client success manager at Learning Tree International, a leading provider of training for the government and for private sector clients. Ryne is also a National Science Foundation grant recipient and a host of his own podcast with Blake Loop, The Science of Personality, which I highly recommend if you haven't listened to it. Today, at a time where more than 8 million students in the United States participate in high school athletics, 480,000 participate in college athletics, and thousands more participate in professional athletics, we're going to explore the psychology behind successful athletes and teams, what sports can teach us about leadership and teamwork, and why so many successful athletes struggle to make the transition into athletic leadership positions. Ryne, I wanted to ask you a question. I remember reading somewhere that Dr. Bob Hogan, who founded Hogan Assessments, he had mentioned that he had started the company and he really views the founding of the company with the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. I was wondering if you could explain to the audience a little bit about what his vision was and what's unique about Hogan Assessments.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me back on the podcast again, Jason. Always good to chat with you. Yeah, the company really got its founding on the basis of the Civil Rights Act, and it really was a two-part thing here. So, Bob Hogan was doing all of this research in personality and was finding, wow, personality predicts all these really important outcomes, all these sorts of career outcomes. It predicts who's a high performer in this job, who's a high performer in that job. And he was basically doing a lot of contract research, a lot with law enforcement, trying to help them find, the best police officers for these roles and all of those kinds of things. And it was the second part was his wife, Joyce, who said, well, you've got all these personality assessments. Well, what about adverse impact? What about racial differences? He said, oh, there's none. There's no differences in this. And she went, whoa, wait a minute. You're telling me you can predict workplace performance and you don't have adverse impact. You don't have race differences. You don't have sex differences. You don't have age differences. He said, yes. And she said, we could really help a lot of people and maybe actually make a little bit of money if we just did that full time. And that was really the inception of the business idea. And it was in some respects combating a culture of not personality, but rather cognitive ability testing, which was probably the most common way for evaluating job candidates prior to the emergence of personality assessments, was to use cognitive ability tests in the workplace to decide who to hire. And, stemming from the Civil Rights Act, a lot of what was really going on there at a sort of secret level almost was an effort to exclude minority candidates, right? So, we'll come up with a cognitive ability test and we'll say that that's related to job performance. But a lot of these cognitive ability tests, and I want to be very clear, there are cognitive ability tests that aren't this way, but a lot of those cognitive ability tests at the time were really culture specific tests, right? That were intentionally to exclude, for example, black job candidates from those jobs. And so what they were really doing was combating that, was saying, hey, we're gonna give you something else that is fair, that actually predicts job performance and isn't outright designed to exclude minority candidates. And that was really the inception of the business.
Oh, that's fascinating. That reminds me of the stories my grandfather, who grew up in South Carolina, used to tell me about. At the polling places, they would have these tests. And he said, it was tests about facts of, U.S. history or South Carolina history, but that it was completely designed to exclude Black people. And it's really interesting to me that in psychology and business, there's sort of a corollary there that probably, it sounds like, lasted until the 1970s. That's that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
One of the things that Dr. Hogan, I do some work with Hogan assessments, but one of the things that Dr. Hogan once said to me was that one of the big moments for him in terms of realizing that there was something to leadership was had to do with Vince Lombardi. Do you know that story, Ryne?
Yes. Yeah. So this was Vince Lombardi, who's the sort of legendary football coach of the Green Bay Packers and had a great deal of success with several Packers teams. I think the first 2 Super Bowls ever were won by his teams. But essentially he got tired of the politics in Green Bay, in part because the way Packers ownership works is it's really the season ticket holders own the team. And anyway, he got tired of dealing with the politics in Green Bay, so he quit. Well, the Washington football team hired him to come be the head coach there. And the team had apparently been abysmal, had a horrible record, not making the playoffs in a long time. And so he said, okay, well, if there's anything to this leadership thing, if there's anything to coaching, if there's anything to who's in charge matters, then we ought to see this football team turn around. And that's exactly what happened. In the very first year that Lombardi was the coach, he took them to the playoffs. And for him, that was this sort of critical incident of, okay, there is something to leadership. There is something about coaching. There is something about who's in charge that really makes a difference in terms of team performance.
Oh, that's cool. And JD, speaking of, leadership and personality, I remember on your first day, or it was your first week when you were in the office, I went by your desk and I saw your head down in a book. And it was actually a book written by Dr. Hogan, Personality and the Fate of Leadership. I was curious, given your role and the work that you do and your background, what was it that caused you to gravitate toward that book?
Yeah, great question, Jason. So I think the main aspect of it is that I was so much interested in the book is because the fact that from sports, from sales, from everything I do, I talk to people, right? So I want to understand people. I want to understand how they react. I want to understand how to assess people, and realizing that words just don't provide, specific details to someone, right? It could be body language. It could be, it could be eye contact. It could be different stuff. So that specific book, really understanding personalities that Hogan sponsored, or Hogan really emphasized on within the book, there were some great key traits that I took away from it and that I was learning through the industry, specifically in personalities and assessments, that I believe would help me within my new role at Goose Creek. And it has, because, even from the voice aspect, right? Figuring out somebody or kind of assessing someone based on, having a conversation, seeing if someone's actually excited within a specific field or not, right? So I think it's just given me the ability more to basically assess people and to not without actually physically having them take an assessment.
Right. That makes complete sense to me. I remember when I was younger and, I played soccer and even through the beginning of my career in leadership development, I thought it was all about skills. I thought that it was all about like being the hardest thrower or the person who could shoot the perfect basketball. But I think over time, what I've realized is I think I first started to realize this when I was coaching, doing my mental health coaching work. A guy who sort of trained athletes came to me, and he had this really exceptional softball player, but she had a lot of anxiety. And I began to see like so much of performance on the field is actually mental. And to help mentally, you really had to get an understanding of what someone's values were, what their personality was. And that actually would help increase performance. That was my general thought. I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, right, I didn't start playing football until my junior year in college. I was a basketball player before then, but I think the main reason why I was so successful and so great on the field because I knew the person, not their skill set. Yeah, I watched a lot of film, but I actually did research on every lineman that I played against. So I would hit their weak points. Like I would know their sisters' names. I would know things that push their buttons. And if I remained cool and I threw them off mentally, then I would probably win the matchup 9 out of 10 times in the game.
It's funny you say that because when I was younger, I was a terrible catcher, horrible catcher in baseball. I mean, I could catch the ball, but wasn't great at hitting. But what kept me on the field was I would get in the heads of whoever was batting. I knew details about them. I could do a cold read, and I would just pick at them and pick at them. And my mom was like baffled. She was like, "He's horrible at hitting. Why are you keeping on the field?" And the coach was like, "Well, because he psychologically breaks down every on the other side." So
Well, well, there's
yeah.
a couple of things that I think are really important there that I think that JD actually hit on without actually even mentioning it, which is the kinds of things that he was thinking about as an athlete, and compared to the athlete that you were working with, Jason, is that anxiety part comes up an awful lot in athletics. And what I've noticed in the athletes that I've worked with is, and some of the best athletes just have this ability to just shake any of that off, right? They just know they're going to perform. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, I won't mention his name, but he's a professional baseball player, professional pitcher. And I remember after one particularly bad game, I mean, he pitched really bad and they hit the crap out of him. I mean, this was like, oh man, and it was a situation where you're kind of like, is this guy going to stay in the majors? Is he going to get sent back to the minors? It was kind of one of those dicey situations. And I was feeling real bad for him. And, I was trying to console him and say, he says, his first reaction was, oh no, it's no big deal. I know exactly what I was doing wrong. Tomorrow it'll be awesome. Yeah. It was just like, oh my God. Like most people would be sitting here going, oh my God, my career's over. This is ruined. And he just had this unbelievable, positive, non-anxious attitude about it. And the way JD described it about his game planning and things is just like, you can just hear that there's just no anxiety there. And the really top athletes have this ability to just, I don't exactly know how they just have this ability to not worry about those things and to get over those kind of anxieties that other people don't. I mean, I can tell you from my own personal experience, I hit worse as a senior in high school than I did as a freshman in college and also as a junior in high school, mostly because I felt a lot more pressure as a senior in high school than I did in the other two situations. So
Interesting.
I can totally get it.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, it makes complete sense to me. And I mean, I think one of the things that stands out to me about athletics that's particularly helpful is, often it's the first team that any of us are on. It's the first time we have to work together. You're on a stage performing, and it's preparation for a lot of what people have to deal with in the world. I had a friend come into town this week, and he brought me this sweatshirt. and it's a sweatshirt that has a picture of a Ukrainian soldier in the Air Jordan. If you've ever looked at the Air Jordan symbol for his Nike Air Jordans, and it's got a picture of that soldier silhouette in that position, slam dunking a watermelon. And that is watermelons in this region of Ukraine called Kherson are sort of one of the main things they produce. And it really struck me in looking at the t-shirt, they're kind of using that as their symbol for victory there, for retaking the city, is that, for so many of us, athletics resonates so deeply. I'm curious, what do you think causes, Ryne, what do you think causes athletics to resonate with people so much?
Well, I think there's several parts of it. One is that, gosh, as we're recording this, the World Cup just finished. I think one big part of it is that there's that competition, and we're really seeing who's the best. There's the entertainment value, of course, as well. But I think for the individuals, and I know we're going to get into this as we go on to the episode, is the team building aspect of it, the working together aspect of it. The sort of testing yourself. I mean, we talked about Vince Lombardi earlier. He used to talk about, really testing yourself, putting yourself to the metal to see, how far can you go? How much can you do? I think that's a big part of what fascinates us about it, is that it really is people pushing themselves to the limit to see how successful they can be.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. For you, JD, did you have that same fascination as you were going into athletics? What caused you to gravitate toward it? I mean, it's such a small percentage of people who make it into college athletics, and even smaller the group of people who makes it into the NFL. What caused you to gravitate toward it?
I think the aspect of being a part of something, right? And then working towards a goal. Like, you're not living every day, at least growing up, right? Growing up, you have school, you have sports, but besides school and progressing in school, like, you have something outside that you're progressing for every day. Like, our coach told me early on in high school when I was playing basketball, he said, if you can get 1% better every day, then you're going to be the best at what you do. So I think it was the aspect of being a part of a team, and then the fact that, you growing up, you see all the most successful people from your neighborhood or that you see on TV. They're in the sports or they're an athlete, right? So being a part of that culture, growing up, and then the fact that you can be competitive and you can be the best at it, you can be number one, right? So that competitive aspect, and there's a main reason why. It's probably a main reason why, like, on the back end, why I ended up getting into sales when I got out of pro football, is because the competitive atmosphere, the environment, and the fact that I'm a part of a team and a company. So just, just striving towards that goal. I think that was the main reason why I got into sports.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
Jason, if you don't mind, I'll probably
go for it.
Some loose speculation here. And I know some folks have talked about this in anthropology literatures and things like that, but I think part of athletics is actually rooted in human history in terms of warfare. I mean, we know for thousands and thousands of years, I mean, that was the way of survival, was through warfare. Like, warfare was the way of life. And in some respects, athletics sort of replaces warfare as, a sort of more productive way of competing without the need for mass murder.
Yeah.
And so I think that's actually one part of it. But I think there are, as we'll talk about here, some other skills that come out of it as well.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been fascinated by what makes, and, JD, you were making the point about seeing other people and looking up to them, and having a role model. And I think that's a big piece of it for me in my head. And Ryne, you were also talking about, some of those same ideas, like being a big fan of Michael Jordan when you were growing up. You had mentioned that to me once. But, I've always been fascinated by what causes athletes to tick. And, and also the fact that we use so much from athletics in business or the workplace. We're constantly talking about home runs or throwing touchdowns, or, being on the 1 yard line. Or my favorite line that I use is, guys, we're running a 2 minute hurry up offense that doesn't end after 2 minutes. It's so much a part of the metaphors we use and the language we use. I'm wondering, from both of you, from a sort of social psychological perspective, you know, is there, and I think you made a great point there, Ryan, about it replacing warfare and sort of our natural drive to compete for resources. But are there core things that you guys can think of that we can learn from athletics in business?
Well, I want to before we dive into this, I want to refer back to Ryan with the warfare. I agree with you 100% on that, because everyone that I've came into contact with, and myself, I've always wanted to dominate and compete. And me being an athlete, a main reason why I got into the athletic realm, it does symbolize warfare, because you want to be the alpha, you want to be the big dog, you want to be the dominant, not to say person or race or whatnot, but just the dominating factor of all your peers. And sports allows you to dominate people and be better than them without, actually physically harming them. So that was a great point, Ryan. I just wanted to refer back to that.
Well, actually, JD, I think it kind of tackles some of what I think I was getting at with the question, because ultimately, I remember going into a government client and talking about, competition and leaders' role in competition. He said, well, we don't compete. And I said, well, yeah, you do. And he was like, no, we don't. I said, well, do you compete in Congress for resources from, that could go to other agencies? Or, do you compete for hearts and minds? Do you compete for an assortment of different things? And I do think a lot of life is really about competition and competition for resources, whether it's an army at war or us trying to be successful in our companies. We're often competing for things. And I wonder whether sort of athletics, when we're younger at least, prepares us for that competition. The competition that some of us don't even really recognize that we're in.
Well, there's no doubt about that. I think that's part of why there's so many athletic metaphors or athlete metaphors. There's even, war metaphors in business as well. It's funny thinking about the athlete metaphors. One of the metaphors I've been talking about recently is it's referred to in the football world as a Monday morning a quarterback, or the armchair quarterback, which is, the person who's sitting there on their couch, or the analyst who after the fact says, oh, this is what they should have done. They should have done this. They should have done that. But, weren't actually out there on the field, have no real experience being on the field, doing those kinds of things, which I think is a pretty interesting analogy right now when we look at the business world. So in the business world, there's a whole lot of that going on when people look at, what this leader should have done, what that leader should have done. And look, I don't want to bag too much on academic colleagues, but there's a whole heck of a lot of people who work in business schools who have no experience actually working in a business. They went and got their PhDs, and they're very smart, and they know a lot of things, and they know a lot about business, at least in principle. But there's a very big difference, I think, in business in practice versus business in principle.
And it's really I don't think it's limited to academics. As somebody who's a former journalist, I remember when I was working at the New York Times, the best business reporters were people who had worked in business before, or had been economists, or had been, and I could, from the inside, looking at the work of those who had done that, the person who did work in technology, or the person who had been, particularly, I can think of striking moments during the Enron scandal when we were covering that. Our best people were the ones who had actually worked in that space before. And, I think that there is some truth to that. You have to be careful about that Monday morning quarterbacking, something you don't entirely understand. So I was going to ask you guys both of you guys another question. I was wondering, what do you think makes the difference, or what factors make a difference between sort of like great athletes and good athletes? and great teams and good teams and the ones that are just not successful in either category?
Well, I'm sure Ryan has a very scientific answer, but
Well, I'm much more interested in what you think, JD.
yeah, you know what's crazy? In my opinion, competing at the highest level and competing in college and then going on pro, it's the fact that the most successful teams, they can implement a scheme and be consistent at it and continue to be good and not map out or go away from it. Like Bill Belichick, right? He does the same thing. When the Patriots were coming to scout me and take a look at me, I spoke with a few of their assistant coaches. He does the same thing every morning in regards to meetings, in regards to his daily routine, everything. So I think the difference when you get to the highest level, it is the Jimmy Joes. Sometimes game plan. And when you have Jordan, sometimes it don't matter what you game plan. He's going to figure out a way to make it happen, right? But in order to be successful and be consistently good year in and year out, it's the teams that they don't do much different. They do the same thing. They find a way to be successful. They find their niche and they just stay good at it. Like Golden State, right? Golden State, they're not going to beat you inside. They know they're not going to beat you inside. So they're going to beat you from outside in transition. They've been doing it for years. So in my opinion, that's just the same thing with Saban at Alabama. Same thing with Ohio State. Some people don't like Ohio State, but I love them. But, it's the same thing, consistency.
Well, and it's interesting that you make that point because one of the things, so I'm not naturally a planner, but one of the things that I've realized over time is that if you do a lot of planning, right? If I focus on whatever game plan I have, or if I'm giving a speech, or if I'm facilitating a conference, or I'm doing something like that, it never goes the way I plan it. But all the planning gives me a great foundation to know how to adapt in the moment because I'm able to sort of like shift. And, there are all these athletes, JD, like Warren Moon, Tim Tebow, come out of college and we think they're going to be superstars. And then you have a Tom Brady who's like the backup quarterback, right? That no one ever thought was going to, was it Drew Bledsoe who was his primary quarterback? It never thought they were going to amount to anything. I'm wondering if sort of some of what you're getting at in terms of both that consistency and adaptability is part of the reason, knowing the right moment to be consistent, knowing the right moment to adapt. Is that why your Tom Brady sort of jump ahead of your Tim Tebows?
Yeah, and you see these guys. Now I'm gonna throw it over to Ryan. I'm sorry, I talk a lot, but you see these guys in the NFL, right? They have one good year. Colin Kaepernick. You have one good year. Tim Tebow. But when they figure you out, when they watch film all day and they figure out what you actually do, RG3, you won't last long if you can't adapt. Like, or if your IQ is not fully there with knowing the game, like Tom Brady, right? Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, you can figure them out, but they're going to adapt to something else because not to say their football IQ is higher than, Tim Tebow or somebody else, but they're consistent in what they do and they don't get away from it. If Tim Tebow, if he has a bad game, if he throws off, he'll change his entire game plan because he's not confident in his specific skill set. Tom Brady, he have a game, he might throw 4 interceptions. I'm not changing nothing. Next week, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm throwing 5 touchdowns and we win by 30.
Well, JD, Hogan has done some pretty amazing research around what makes a team effective, team effectiveness. And one of those foundational things is obviously trust. And then, that concept of norms, right? Like, how are we going to operate together? How are we going to communicate together? And also, do we have an aligned mission, right? You think about people like Jordan, you think of people like Brady, like they have a mission. It's championships. Everyone gets aligned around it and helps them become effective. And then results focus, right? They're focused on the results. But one aspect of that model that Ryan helped create is about adaptability and being able to adapt. Ryan, is that something that you think is really important for athletes?
Well, I certainly do. And in fact, I thought that's one of the things that stuck out about what JD was talking about there. And it's not only true for I think in that teams literature, and I'm sure I'm also not the only one who thinks that. In fact, I'm reminded of a famous Billie Jean King quote, and it's not really much of a quote, but she basically just said, "Winners adapt," and that's it. And I think that's true in tennis. I think that's true in football. I mean, you've seen teams go in at halftime and go, okay, wow, that didn't work. We've got to do something different, and come out and have a totally different second half. Didn't this just happen a week ago or so?
Yeah.
Where a team was down 30 something
Yep.
points and came back to win the biggest comeback after halftime, I think.
Yeah.
So I mean, so there's that, and to JD's point about these, this also happens in baseball. You see this in baseball. A brand new pitcher comes in, and it's just lights out, and nobody can hit him. Or a hitter just has an amazing season as a rookie, and nobody can figure out how to get him out. And then all of a sudden, somebody figures out how to get him out, and if they can't adapt, if they can't figure out, oh wow, I have to make some changes. I can't just keep doing things the same way that worked for me before. Then that's it. Their careers are really short-lived. And so I think that adaptability is a really important part of our own careers. It's really critical for team success as well.
Yeah, you're causing pain, Ryne. You're making me think of Chris Davis, the Orioles hitter, who went from signing I don't know, it was like north of $100 million
huge contract.
Yeah. And went from being one of the best players in the league to absolutely one of the worst players. And I remember them focusing on mechanics. And there was one commentator who was a former player who said it's not his mechanics. His mechanics have not changed. It's that everybody knows where he can hit now and where he can't hit. And they put the ball where he can't hit.
Right.
So that's super interesting, guys. I thinking about those, the example of Tom Brady or somebody like Michael Jordan, they were excellent situational leaders, right? Like, Tom Brady can read a defense, he can call plays. Jordan could get in the head of his opponents and get ahead of them. But I also sort of feel like, they were transformational leaders. Like they were really skilled at rallying teams around a common purpose or a common goal. And I think about that thing about mission alignment. Is there something to be said about that in sports as well?
Well, if you don't mind, if I jump in here, I think one of the key things that we've seen in our research on teams and mission alignment really actually has to do, well, and partly it's about results focus too, that you see with leaders like Tom Brady and Michael Jordan, right? A lot of times you get to see them sort of in public and in interviews, and they seem relatively polite, friendly, pretty sociable. Michael Jordan on the golf course smoking a cigar seems like kind of a fun guy to be around.
Yeah.
Tom Brady looks like probably kind of a fun guy to be around. But then every now and then you get these clips of them on the sideline in somebody's face on their team, hounding them. And, The Last Dance chronicled, just how almost unbearable at times Michael Jordan could be as a teammate. And mostly that was because it was about holding people accountable, about pushing people for results. And you see that with Brady as well. And I think that's a part that gets downplayed a lot. We sort of see that as, over controlling leadership or overly demanding or not people oriented, right? Not being people oriented enough. But I think the key lesson there is it's not so much about being people oriented. That's not the solution to leadership success, and or being task oriented isn't the solution either. It's about picking and choosing your spots, understanding when it's time to get on somebody, when it's time to hold someone accountable for results, and when it's time to put your arm around somebody and pull them in.
Yeah, those are great points, Ryne. And I think you see this a lot in college football with college head coaches. If they don't have a set mission or a set direction, then you'll see the outcome of the team. Just for example, like Deion Sanders, he's at Colorado now, but his mission and where he wants to go is laid out and straight. He took Jackson State from a nobody to rank in the top 25 in FCS in like a year and a half, and he had a mission and a plan. And like you said, some guys some people you have to hold more accountable than others, and every approach is different. So yeah, you're 100% right. But I notice this a lot. You notice it at the pro level because a lot of people in the pros, they get that money and they don't have that same drive.
Right.
But then you see it a lot in college because the head coach, at least college sports in general, because the head coach, he has a lot of responsibility, and not all your players on your team are pros, right? So you have to approach everything different. So I think it was awesome.
Yeah, and it sort of gets at the idea of like you have a coach, but there's also this other leader who's the team captain, the Jordans, the Bradys. And we're used to talking about superstars, but I've always wondered, what would the Patriots have been without Brady, which we may have gotten a glimpse of? What would Brady be without the Patriots? And what would Jordan be without the Bulls, or the Bulls without Jordan? You have any thoughts on that?
Oh, Ryan, I want to hear it from your point of view.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, Brady made up a lot of success for the Patriots. They were successful. They were pretty successful before he became the starting quarterback. But then, they got that ultimate level of success, the Super Bowls, once he actually took over. And then, as we've seen since he left, Tampa Bay's had a lot of success. And that's isn't to knock on Belichick or the Patriots or their system. I still think they've been pretty successful. But I think, there's this excellent book called The Captain Class that really talks about these really, truly exceptional teams that have gone on just absolutely phenomenal runs. And it's just this analysis is by a guy named Sam Walker, who I believe is the sports editor at the Wall Street Journal, which is not a place usually people think of when they think for sports. But it's just this really excellent detailed look at, it looked at all kinds of sports, looked at rugby, looked at women's volleyball, looked at soccer or football, however you want to call it, and just said, what are these teams that just really excelled for some long period of time? And what he found was a common thread there was not the head coach of the team, which you might think that would be the answer, but it was actually the arrival and departure of some captain. I can give you a couple examples. One was the Yankees when Yogi Berra became the catcher. Basically, the time he became the catcher to the time he retired, they were unbelievably successful. And basically, the moment he retired, there was a drop-off. The San Antonio Spurs with Tim Duncan.
Yep.
Right? They were pretty successful before Duncan arrived, but they became exceptionally successful after he was there. And as soon as he left, they were still pretty decent, but never quite that level of success. And so I think there is a pretty important role that captain plays in driving. Look, Tom Brady's how old? 40 something, right?
Yeah.
If he shows up, I don't know. This is how I think. JD may think of it differently. If I'm 22 years old, 23 years old out of college, and I see the 40-year-old showing up to practice an hour and a half before everybody else, and they're working and then staying late, I might be thinking, shit, man, this is how we do it. And especially with his track record of success.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that I think would motivate me as a player.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. And I know Aaron Donald, right? I went to visit or work out for the LA Chargers. They were the San Diego Chargers. We had like this camp, and this guy came in at like 5:36, watched film, left at 9 or 10 at night. And you coming in as a rookie and you like, this is why he's this guy. So like you said, the captain, especially in pro sports, it means a lot because you can lose a locker room. And once you lose that locker room, the head coach can't save it.
Right.
So that's an interesting point because we tend to think of the head coach as the leader of the team. And, in taking those the examples and the examples you guys have given, you think about the Patriots, and I wonder whether the reason why they struggled was because they actually lost their leader and that the head coach really wasn't the leader, and why the Bulls certainly lost their leader when Jordan in the 1990s left for those 2 seasons where they didn't win a championship, but they were still good. But probably the difference was there was another leader on the Bulls. They had Scottie Pippen. So, I wonder whether that's also sort of thinking in athletics or in the workplace, whether your succession planning is an important part of it.
Jason, all I can say is, did you see that Patriots game last week when they kept throwing the ball back lateral? They kept doing I forgot the name of it, but backyard football
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
with
Lateral pass. Right.
with the Raiders, right? That
Yep.
would have never happened if Tom Brady was there, because he would not play that. You're 24-24. You're going to overtime. You're not losing, right? Belichick's still there, and that happened. So Ryan makes a great point about that.
Well, and I think the business relevance here, Jason, is that look, CEOs play an important role in companies. There's no doubt about that. There's studies that have been done showing that they contribute to about maybe 14 to 25% of a organization's revenue on an annual basis, right? Having the right CEO in place. But I think you can really lose an organization. This really speaks to what Jason was saying about losing the locker room. The way you lose your organization and the way your organization falls apart is not at that level. Like it can, right? You can have and those make a lot of headlines, right? The disastrous CEO at Enron, that kind of situation, right? But most organizations don't go down that way. The way they go down is when those captains, right? Those managers, those first line supervisors just go, you know what, this place kind of sucks and I'm not going to be putting in any extra effort. And their employees see that, right? Their teams see that. And they go, yeah, me too. And that's it, right? And then it's lost. And then the business just goes downhill from there.
Yeah, 100% right. 100%.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll never forget this one moment. I think it was 1996. I'm an Orioles fan, so you can tell I'm a diehard fan of my team. Clearly not fair weather. But I remember this one moment, Adam Jones, who wasn't the best player on the team, he was really sort of the team leader. And the coach, it was a great moment. If it had been successful, I bet it would have worked. Game was tied. It was extra innings. The coach decided to bring in a starting pitcher to deal with the top of the order of the team we were playing. And Adam Jones ran from the outfield to the bullpen and tried to get our star closing pitcher, Zach Britton, to jump in. He literally said to him, "Put yourself in the game. Put yourself in the game." It didn't end up happening, but Britton got up and started walking toward putting himself in the game. And I bet we would have won if they had listened to Jones, who was probably the real leader. But Ryan, that point that you're making about, things that we can learn in business about leadership, one of the things that stuck out to me in hiring on my end is I've often hired athletes, younger athletes, who have performed really, really well in the workplace. And so I'm curious, Shady, what is it do you think about athletics that prepares people, even younger people, not necessarily leaders, but prepares them for the workplace?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I get that a lot. In my opinion, I just think just the drive aspect, the aspect to be the best at what you do. And then you're coming from a coaching environment, right? So you're people, supervisors, managers.
Kind of the thought that you're open to ideas.
Yeah, I mean, if for example, if Ryan or yourself gave me a task, I wouldn't question it because, you're an expert and I look at you as a coach, right? Just like I looked at my coach when I was playing football. I never questioned them. Because in my opinion, I believe that they always had my best interest at heart. So I think the ability to be coachable, the ability to want to be the best at what you do, and then have and drive and goal, right? They always told us, and I read this quote out of a book, dreams without goals are dead. So we always had goals. So anything that we do in life, whether it's a job, whether it's family, whether it's sports, we have high goals. So, I mean, just to sum it up, in my opinion, I think athletes do so well in the workplace, and a lot of companies that I've interviewed and worked at, they would rather hire an athlete than just a regular student, because I think it's the drive. I think it's the ability to be coachable, and most important, the ability to set higher goals than, I want to say the average person.
Yeah. And I think as somebody who's a coach, JD, I know you made the point about not necessarily questioning. I think one of the most important things about being a coach, and I think there's a similarity between being a leadership coach, mental health coach, an athletic coach. And in fact, like, you know, the leaders, the Google's coach, the guy who coached at Google was a former football coach. He really brought the team coaching model there. But one of the things about being a coach is it is, you know, it may ultimately be your decisions, but it's really, coaching is about a conversation, right? You know, I give you direction, you ask me questions, I help you figure things out, you help me figure out that I'm wrong. And I think maybe there's something about it related to that coachability idea that you're getting to, this two-way street that may not exist in a true normal, sort of normal hierarchical situation for young people. That desire to learn and that willingness to engage, and you know, that may be super super important. So, if athletes have so much to offer us in terms of leadership, why do you think so many top athletes often struggle when they try to move to the next level, like college to NFL, or they become coaches and, you know, they struggle coaching? And then some great coaches weren't superstars when they played. I can think of one example for me. When I was at Maryland in the early 90s, we had this quarterback who was amazing, Scott Milanovich. He broke all sorts of records for passing, completions, percentage. His numbers were better than Boomer Esiason's were, but he also broke the record for interceptions. So I wasn't surprised when he went off to the NFL and struggled in the NFL. But what's happened, you know, he spent 1 year at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think he went to Germany to play, and he may have gone to the Canadian Football League. But, you know, he started coaching, and now he's the Indianapolis Colts quarterback coach, and he's one of the best quarterback coaches. So I don't think there's always, I guess what I'm getting at, maybe there isn't, maybe one lesson in that part is that, you know, there's not necessarily a really great correlation, that it might be a bit of a myth, that high potential is linked to high performance at one particular level.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had a high performing coach that coached me in college. He was my defensive line coach. He was All-American at Alabama, multiple Pro Bowler. But safe to say, he wasn't the best coach I had. He wasn't the best coach I had. The best coach I had didn't make it to the NFL, right? Played college, played at a Division III college, but right now he has the most HBCU athletes in the NFL of all time, right? Like I was saying earlier, he literally thought he was a freakish athlete, and he was like 1% out of anybody when he played for Bear Bryant, right?
Ah,
So you had to be a great athlete to play on his defense. So he just couldn't coach anybody. Like just put it this way, the reason I made it to the NFL was the coach prior to him, because all the skills that I learned, I used my last year. So I didn't learn any new skills, which is why the Patriots didn't draft me, because Belichick asked me to my face. He said, "What happened? What happened from this year to this year on film?" And I didn't have an answer. I didn't get better. So in my opinion, the reason why great players, well, not all of them, but most great players cannot be great coaches, because they think every player is supposed to be able to do stuff as easy as they were able to do it, right? So my coach, I was a great player, so it was I wouldn't say great player. I was a pretty good player, so it was easy for him to coach me, because if he was like, "Jihad, do a chop club, rip under, bench to the quarterback," I could do it. But that guy that needed to be developed, if he told him that, he'd be like, "I'm not as athletic as Jihad, so it's tougher for me to do that. So how can I get to that point?" But then you got those guys or women that weren't as good in college or in the NFL, so they over prepare and they analyze everything, because they knew they weren't the best player on the field, so they had to do other things in order to get to that closest to perfection as possible, which is why they're great coaches most of the time. Like I can't think of the guy that's the NFL coach now, but Sean McVay, right?
Uh-huh.
He'd been around the game. he knows the game. I don't think he really played, but he knows the game and he over prepares. And when he prepares, he executes. He doesn't expect his talent to beat someone else's. He expects his game plan to beat someone else's. So yeah, that's just my point of view.
And Ryan, I kind of think we do something like that in business, in hiring. We often like make assumptions. We look for people who are like us. We look for people to work the same way that we do. And we don't really recognize that there are lots of different paths. And maybe there's an advantage to not necessarily being the best player on the field, because the guy who has to work harder and that it doesn't come natural to him has to understand the game much better.
Yeah, well, I think what JD said is, and what you're saying there is exactly right. I mean, the example that comes to mind for me is Nolan Ryan. He it seems to still not understand why pitchers can't throw 100+ pitches a game like he used to do. Right? He was like, wow, so many complete games and just pitch, always pitching, never coming out. And it's just like, well, doesn't make for the best coach, because the thing, as JD said, the things that he could do, other people just can't do that. And I think that's also true in Michael Jordan's case. I don't think he would be a particularly good coach, because even if you try to tell somebody what to do, many people can't actually execute or do those things the way that you can do them. And I think the other thing that happens is that some really exceptional athletes can't even explain to you what they're doing or why they're doing it. They just make decisions. And I think what makes really good coaches is ones who can explain to you, this is why we're doing the thing. Whether they can do it or not is a different thing. I think that's also true, by the way, for musicians, right? Some musicians can just play music and they can't really tell you why this is the right note here, but they just know that it is. And other people can teach it to you and can say, like, okay, this is why these are the right ones. And they're just very different.
Yeah, those great points.
Yeah. I think those are all really great points, because when I think often in a business environment, like one of the things that I have to be very conscious of, and I think leaders that I work with have to be very conscious of, is you don't want to try and get someone to play let's say the guitar the way that you play it. You want them to kind of play it in the best way for them that's going to get the end result of the music. So if that means like arching your hands at a slightly different degree or whatever it is, if you're open to the idea that there are many different paths for people to be successful, and you're looking at the actual whole person in front of you instead of this model that you used, you're going to have an opportunity to be more effective. And I think about that a lot in working with people coming up from Generation Y, and also millennials, and people complaining about, the way that they want to work, and, and generational differences even. But I kind of think that the answer to some extent is not to worry about the generation or the way that you did it versus the way that they did it, but to actually look at the person in front of you and not try to help them find your path, help them find their path, the right path for them to be most effective. Does that kind of fit with what you guys are getting at?
Yeah, it totally does for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I wanted to ask you guys too was, I'm curious because, Hogan and even our company are very focused on things like personality, competencies, values, and competencies are really just behaviors, that clusters of behaviors that people have. But we're very focused on personality. We're very focused on values. And I'm curious, from your perspective, Ryan, and then also yours, JD, what do you think? Are there ideal personality characteristics, derailers, or even values for athletes?
Well, I think that's a pretty interesting question. So we've got quite a bit of athletic data here over the last several years at Hogan from a variety of sports, and we're still collecting more right now. But one of the things that has actually stood out to us, and some people come to us and they'll say things like, "Well, okay, we need a personality profile for an offensive lineman, a personality profile for a quarterback, and a personality profile." I don't think that is going to be very fruitful. I just don't think there's, this is the personality profile for this position or that position.
Yeah.
But one of the things that has stood out in what I've looked at is there is a sort of top level athlete personality profile. There is a personality profile that sort of fits with NFL athletes, the way that they think, the kinds of values that they have. And one of the things that we've seen in the data that we have so far is that there's only a handful in every draft class, but there's a handful of athletes who just don't match that, who just don't like, they don't look like the rest of the group from a personality profile perspective. And what we've seen is that those athletes tend to not make the roster, right? So if you look at, between draft day and between when the roster actually gets set later on, several months later, those people are actually substantially less likely to make it. So I think there is some component of sort of
Fascinating.
fitting in with the culture that's really important.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've done some, leadership coaching in the NFL with NFL executives. And, one of the really interesting things for me, very similar to other work I do, I first look at what their context is. And, I want to know what are their organizational challenges? What are the challenges in their role? And then I want to look at their personality and their values through the lens of that context. But very often I find there are very similar things coming up in the values. And Ryne, is there any research data on which values might be more important than others?
Well, it doesn't seem like it's necessarily consistent across all sports, but in the data that we looked at, and I actually didn't pull it up for our, for our conversation today, I do remember a few that stood out, particularly in the NFL data that we have, was they tend to score very high on tradition, which I think makes a lot of sense. You also see this in the military. It's about, chain of command, who's in charge, knowing what rules to follow, what's my assignment, doing my assignment, sticking to the game plan. That's really a big part of what it means to be high tradition, and that's what we see with a lot of the NFL players. And we see the players who sort of buck that trend, who sort of say, "Oh, I like to try things my own way. I like to deviate from the norm. I like to challenge the authority and say, no, I don't think so. I think we should do it this way." That doesn't seem to go over very well.
Yeah. Yeah. They typically have the most problems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
It's really interesting that you pulled that one out in the context of this conversation with JD. Guess who has the highest tradition score on our entire staff?
Is that right?
He does.
Well, that makes good sense.
And I think there's something to be said for the idea of that role clarity is important, and being principled is probably very important, and less of a focus maybe on autonomy, which is a value. Progress and autonomy are very much a value, but they can kind of get in the way of sort of a team operating in unison. Are there any sort of common derailers, Ryne, that you know of that get in the way? And JD, are there any common derailers that you can see get in the way of the success of athletes?
I think their environment. Some athletes are great in more stable environments. When you get to the higher levels, then the environment is not as stable, right? You got more money, you have more people around you, you have more leeches around you to say, when you're in college, you can be protected, right? I remember when I was in West Virginia, I had a friend that played at West Virginia. They had entire security guards around them in case anything happened, right? In Morgantown.
Wow.
So if anything, like it's an incident that happened with Pac-Man that nobody never know about because, the security system handled it, but Pac-Man Jones. But I mean, when you get to the NFL, you don't have a coach checking on you on a consistent basis. So the environment can change the way someone thinks. That's why you see people like, Antonio Brown come from a small school, pretty relaxed, pretty calm. His environment changed. He just changed to a different person. So I think the environment is the main thing that, whether it's positive or negative, right? You can come from a school where you're a troublemaker like Tariq Hill, and then you go under the right coach under Andy Reid, and you change your entire attitude from have a bad reputation to a pretty good reputation right now. Is his environment. So I think it can work both ways.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, JD, because in our data, some of the derailers that really stood out as being associated with being one of these top level NFL athletes, and this is pretty impressive because this is a large sample, but we saw that the average NFL draftee scored at the 84th percentile on reserved, which is really about keeping distance, probably in some respects avoiding those kinds of situations that you're talking about. I think that seems to be, a characteristic that really matters. But also at the same time, and they scored at the 84th percentile on bold, which is about having confidence. And I think, to be a top athlete at that level, you have to have a lot of belief in yourself. I'll also point out that these folks were in their early 20s, and we do know that, I assume you, like me, were probably more confident in your early 20s than as you got older. But they also score very high on diligent and dutiful, which is it's just really about that rule following part, about that attention to detail, about focusing, about practice, about effort, about really just trying to maximize performance, and be part of the team. And I think all of that's really, to me, when I saw that, I thought, wow, this really makes sense for high level athletes to be like this, to avoid distractions, right? To be hyper focused on what they're doing, and to believe in their ability to succeed.
I think you're 100. Like I said, you're 130%. If you can go 100%, especially with the confidence and belief, it's so many individuals that came in the league that I knew, and they weren't well known in college, but they just had the mindset, like you said, they believed in themselves and they were confident. They, so to say, they speak stuff into existence, and it really changed their careers. The one guy I'm thinking about, John Morant that plays with the Grizzlies basketball. He's small school, but you cannot tell this guy anything, right? So.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing on that, and gosh, go back to when we talked about earlier, was Tom Brady. I think there's this famous story where he met Robert Kraft, and like shortly after he got drafted, right? So I mean, he was this, maybe third string quarterback even at the time, and he said, "Oh, I want to thank you so much for drafting me, taking a chance on me. I want to let you know that this is the best decision this organization's ever made."
I heard that story. Yeah,
well, think about that. Think about that. Like, I mean, and I think part of that is you run the risk of bordering on arrogance, right? And so you always have to watch out for that potential, right? Is overconfidence and arrogance, but at the same time, what you want is somebody who really believes in themselves, right? Who really believes that they can achieve, that they can put in the work, that they're willing to do it to get there. Not someone who's sort of entitled, right? And so there's that trade-off there. But I think nonetheless, what we see is we certainly see plenty of these athletes who really do have that belief in themselves.
Yeah, and it's one of the interesting things about derailers, personality derailers, things that are roadblocks that get in the way of your success, that they're actually really strengths that get overused. So you want that quarterback who's willing to throw that throw that nobody thinks he's going to land, but not throw the interception.
Right.
And I think that in managing those derailers, it's about getting into that sweet spot between the interception and the throw to Gronkowski that nobody thought anyone could take. And I also thought your point, Ryne, about being reserved makes such sense to me. At first, I was thinking about it. Why? Because someone being more reserved, they might be independent, objective, but a little bit more introverted. But if you look on the other side of it, people who are really low in reserve struggle with boundaries and struggle with staying steady in the storm. So that combination of sort of confidence and being able to stay steady in the storm seem like great qualities for athletes and great qualities for leaders in general.
Absolutely.
So what advice would you guys have for, people who want to be coaches, people who want to be athletes or general managers? What advice would you have for them in terms of, their development or the things that they can do to sort of drive success?
Man, that's a loaded question. I'm gonna let Ryne get there.
Someone once said that I ask questions like a Barack Obama press conference, that there are 5 questions built into every one. So I can go back and tackle that one again. I'm just curious, what advice would you give either athletes or coaches about being successful and having successful teams?
in the NFL in specific, or I take that back, any pro sports in specific, I think networking is huge for coaching to getting into business, even if you're a past player, because you see so many players or so many coaches that get opportunities, they not necessarily based so much off of their past performance or who they or what they've done in the past in the sport, but building those relationships, networking, really loving the game, and just showing up to events where you can get in front of the right people to get in coaching positions. For example, my little brother, he's an equipment manager for the Philadelphia Eagles, right? He didn't have the best credentials, but my father knew one of the assistant coaches. Networking got into the organization, and now he's moving up, pushing towards to be one day to be a general manager. So I mean, I think that's huge because it's people that come in coaching every year. They don't have to be the best player or the best athlete, but just I think networking and connections is huge with coaching.
Well, and I would reiterate what JD said about really having a passion for what you're doing. I think that's true in all businesses. If you're not really passionate about what you're doing if you're only in it to make money, right, or if you're only in it to try to be famous, or you're just not going to be successful. And I think the reason most people get into coaching isn't to be famous. It isn't to make a bunch of money. It's because they want to contribute some knowledge that they have. They want to help some, in many cases, young athletes. Particularly, I mean, most of the coaches aren't NFL coaches. Most coaches coach, Pop Warner, and they coach, youth football and youth baseball, and I think most of those coaches really feel like they want to contribute to the community. They want to contribute to future of what people in their communities are going to be in terms of leaders, what the people in their community are going to be in terms of teammates. And I think that's one of the things that they really develop as part of sports. And so that's to me is the primary thing. If you want to be a coach, like that to me should be your goal. That's the thing you're most passionate about. And then look into coaching.
Yeah, I remember hearing this story, sort of flipping the script and thinking about what leaders and employees in other industries can learn from athletes. I remember this story about Andre Agassi, the tennis player, and he went from playing very well to, I think he dropped from like the first to 140th in terms of his ranking. It was like within a year or some short period. And his coach said something to him like, you got a choice. You can do one of two things. You can either decide to quit or start over. And he decided that starting over was the right choice and taking the lessons from his failure. And I've always wondered about athletics, like you can't always win. And that was one of the great lessons. No matter how good you are, you can't always win. And one of the things I've found in business is that you actually fail. Failure is what leads you to success. And I also sort of feel like in athletics, teamwork is something that we learn a lot about that transitions. But a point that both of you guys have kind of gotten at is having difficult conversations is really a part of it. And you have to, when you're constantly getting graded on the field or the court, you have to have difficult conversations that sometimes we avoid in the boardroom or the C-suite or on the front lines of work. And you guys have really been talking about leadership as opposed to management. And those are all takeaways that I'm sort of pulling. But if you were to sort of like flip the script and think about what is it that people in the workplace can learn from athletes and athletics, what would those things be?
Well, I would point to some of the things that JD mentioned earlier, right? In terms of setting goals, planning, preparation, drive, motivation, that competitiveness, the teamwork skills, leadership skills. These are all things that you learn in athletics, and you don't really learn those anywhere else. I mean, there are a few other places you could learn in sort of non-athletic places to learn about teamwork, but leadership and teamwork are really essential parts of many athletic endeavors, and you learn a lot about that. One of the other ththings that I feel like always impressed me about athletes, particularly student athletes, was their ability to manage time, which is really, really important when you're looking for, for potential employees. You're looking for people who could manage their work and their home life. They can balance both of those things at the same time. And that's what student athletes spend a lot of their time doing. They've got classes, they've got social lives, and they've got athletics, and they have to balance that in a way to make everything work and to be successful in all of those. And I think that's a real skill that people can learn from athletes.
Yeah. JD?
No, I think Ryan hit it right on the head. I mean, just the ability to get up every day and have a purpose, right? And translate that purpose to the workplace, whether that's goal setting, working with the team. And you learn all this, like you said, you learn all this in sports. Leadership abilities to operate under stress and not be stressed. I know Jason always says, like, you seem to be calm all the time or seem to be laid back. But yeah, I mean, operate under stressful situations and not be stressed. And most importantly, having the ability to not only set goals for yourself and for the company you're working with, but to bring that competitive energy and fire and engagement every day to the workplace every day. I mean, that's right. We look at coming into work as practice, but when you get that big opportunity, it's game time, right? Especially in sales. You reaching out to clients, you're prospecting, you're practicing, even though it is a game, but you're practicing. But then when you get in front of that client, it's game time. It's time to deliver. So I think having that attitude every day in sports translates great to the actual workplace.
So JD, that line you just said about how I talk about how calm you are to your face. Yeah. I'll tell you what I say behind your back. I say JD hits the sweet spot between resilience and willingness to still take feedback. Because for a lot of people who are really resilient, the downside is, things bounce off of you. So you don't necessarily absorb some of the feedback. And I feel like you have that right amount of resilience to go forward, but that same willingness to take feedback. And I think that's both super important, both in business and in sports.
I appreciate it.
And one of the, just in sort of like wrapping and closing, because I really, 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 really enjoyed this conversation. If nothing else, exploring like the fascinating parts about athletics and a lot of their connections. I was wondering if you guys, in terms of just thinking about more broadly the idea of what we can learn about the way that, personality and values play a role in both athletics and work, are there any sort of key takeaways you might want to offer for our listeners? And I'll let you go first, Ryan. I mean, JD, and then I'll let you go first or next, Ryan.
I just think with both avenues, you have to have your values and your missions and your goals just have to line up. Whether you want to be a top athlete or you want to be a top, corporate manager. I think the correlation between being in athletics and being in business or corporate America, you have to have the right values, the right mission that fits for yourself, and you have to have the right goals that all align. So if you're talking about sports and business, that is one thing that will be 100% in common, regardless if you're a pro athlete or if you're someone like Ryne at the top level, top executive level at a prestige organization.
Ryan, any thoughts on that on your end?
Yeah, well, I think JD actually said it really well. I think that's what the common tie is that willingness to put in that extra work. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we see with lots of athletes. Top athletes are they're willing to put in that extra time. They're willing to put in that extra work, and I think you see that with high performing people in the workplace. Now, I can step back there and put a little bit of a downside on that too. I mean, a lot of top performing athletes, a lot of top performing executives do not have exactly the best family lives. In many cases, we learn that, that in fact, they're often putting their home life second. And so there are some trade-offs. I think if you really say, hey, I want to be the top person at this, top person in athletics, or the top person in it, I'm not saying that there are no examples of people who are both, but frequently, we have a limited amount of time. And so you really have to decide, where do you want to dedicate your time? Where do you want to dedicate your effort? How important is it to you to be the absolute best or the very best at this, at whatever activity it may be, whether it's in business or in sports. And I think people have to make those decisions. But I think but the commonality really is that drive, drive for performance, drive for success.
Oh, it's very interesting. One of the I once worked with a senior executive, C-suite executive, a woman who, well known and very high up in technology, and she would often get called to women's conferences and events where people would ask her questions in the audience. How do you have it all? How do you have the work-life balance? And how do you have, this high-powered career? And she said, I don't have it all. You have to make a choice.
Right.
you have to decide what you want to be. Well, and I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with having, it being balanced out. But I always thought that was super fascinating and a super fascinating lesson for me.
I thought it was amazing that the same exact thing Ryne just said, Jason said to me in my debrief.
Really?
About distributing time. About where you have all these high performance goals, but where are you spending your time? How do you want to spend your time? And is there really balance? Right. So the same exact thing Ryne just said, Jason said the same exact thing in my debrief. The same exact thing. Like, what do you want to trade off? Like, it was because I said I would rather I value time more than money, and then you went to the exact same spiel that Ryne.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
well, and it's an interesting thing, JD, and part of the reason why every new employee takes a personality and values assessment here is, I want to, our managers want to understand what your values are and help you align them with your goals and your role here. So, and again, that was your Hogan assessment debrief, right?
Yep. Hogan assessment. Yep.
Yeah. And I think, it's a powerful tool that helps align the different players on the team with the ultimate team goal. I might be motivated to help a little lady across the street because, I think it's socially appropriate behavior. You might be motivated to do it because you're an altruist. But if the team goal is just to help the little lady across the street, it doesn't matter. We just need to line up our values so we can do it. Well, guys, this has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it. I want to thank you both for being here.
Thanks so much, Jason. I don't mean to cut you off, but man, I want to say thanks so much again for having me on here. This is always great chatting with you. Always great to be part of the podcast, and really appreciate it.
Thank you. And same to you, JD. It's great to have you on. I'm sure you'll be back again. I really appreciate both of all of what you shared, and I hope that it has a positive benefit on people. So thanks for joining us on this great interview with Ryne Sherman and Jihad Abdur-Rahman. We're looking forward to being with you all again on the next episode. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook Podcast.